In every war there are stories carved in stone and others buried in silence. But beneath the silence lies something colder, a pulse of secrets still alive beneath the dust. These are the shadows of operations erased from maps, the files that never reached daylight, and the men who vanished behind sealed doors. In forgotten vaults, they left traces of engines that shouldn't have burned, prayers written in chemical code, and faith bound to weaponry. Somewhere between salvation and science a bargain was made, one that neither church nor country will ever admit to. These stories were never meant to be told, never meant to be remembered. But history does not forgive its ghosts. It only waits for them to speak again. Tonight, the archives open, not to honor the past, but to uncover what it was desperate to hide. Chapter 1. Operation Eclipse, the vanished Luftwaffe division. In the final, fractured weeks of the Third Reich, as the Allies pushed deeper into the heart of Germany, a peculiar absence haunted Allied intelligence reports. Units of the US 7th Army advancing through Bavaria repeatedly encountered evidence of Luftwaffe assets that had seemingly evaporated. Empty hangars with fresh tire tracks, scattered flight manifests abruptly ending mid-page, and supply requisitions marked as fulfilled, yet missing their recipients. Among these vanished entities was a special Luftwaffe detachment, known only in fragmented German records as Gruppe Eclipse. For decades, historians believed it to be a clerical phantom, one of many paper divisions invented to confuse Allied reconnaissance. But in 1991, when a partial microfilm of Oberkommando der Luftwaffe communications was declassified in Washington, the name resurfaced in chilling detail. The documents, dated between February and April 1945, described the movement of an unregistered wing from Schwechat to a remote facility near Innsbruck, designated Flugplatz Oberammer. The base was listed as a refueling depot. Yet photographs from US aerial reconnaissance in late March showed extensive underground construction. Nearby villagers spoke of night convoys and aircraft that emitted no visible exhaust, described only as black shadows that rose without sound. The personnel roster of Gruppe Eclipse was unlike any other Luftwaffe division, comprised not of career pilots, but engineers and scientists formerly attached to the Peenemünde test range and the Luftfahrtforschungsanstalt at Völkenrode. By mid-April, as Soviet forces breached Berlin's outer defences, all radio traffic from Eclipse ceased. A final message intercepted by British signals intelligence, transmitted on April 22nd at 23:14 hours, contained a short code sequence and the phrase, "Cargo secured. Transition begins." The message's encryption pattern matched that used for top-level Reich armament projects. Then, silence. When US forces entered Innsbruck in early May, a reconnaissance patrol under Captain William H. Reeves of the 103rd Infantry Division discovered a camouflaged airstrip buried under netting and timber. The hangars were empty, except for a scattering of spent fuel drums marked with a single word, Kepler. Reeves's report, dated May 6, 1945, included a hand-drawn map of an access tunnel running beneath the Tyrolean limestone ridge. The tunnel was sealed by an iron blast door. Lacking orders, Reeves's unit dynamited the entrance. Behind it, they found rows of crates filled with tools, wiring, and burned flight logs, each bearing the insignia of the Reichsluftfahrtministerium, RLM. The smell of ozone and burned oil clung to the air. Reeves noted that the rock walls showed signs of heat damage, consistent with jet exhaust or chemical ignition. His report was marked secret and forwarded to the Counterintelligence Corps. Within days, the US Army Corps of Engineers cordoned off the site. Locals were told it had been contaminated by ammunition residue. Trucks bearing the insignia of the Office of Strategic Services arrived, and all documentation vanished into Allied custody. A surviving German mechanic, interrogated months later in Salzburg, claimed that the aircraft stationed there were prototypes, one-seater interceptors powered by liquid light engines. His phrasing puzzled investigators, who dismissed it as the ramblings of a desperate man trying to barter knowledge for leniency. He was transferred to a detention camp and died of pneumonia within the year. In the 1950s, references to Eclipse appeared again, buried within the paperclip archives at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. A memorandum dated March 12, 1952, listed Project Eclipse under Recovered Enemy Technology, evaluation pending. The memo's attachments were redacted, but an internal comment noted possible relation to high-altitude propulsion. A parallel document from the US Atomic Energy Commission mentioned a sample alloy of unknown fabrication, designated X12B, traced back to a Tyrolean recovery in 1945. Metallurgical tests described it as non-ferrous, crystalline, highly heat-resistant, composition inconsistent with known wartime German materials. The samples later disappeared. In 1967, a retired Air Force technician named Harold L. Greaves gave an interview to a local newspaper in Dayton, Ohio. He claimed to have seen crates labeled Eclipse Project inside a restricted hangar in 1949. According to Greaves, the crates contained wing sections and engines that didn't look right. Too smooth, no bolts, no seams. Within a week of the article's publication, federal agents visited the paper and confiscated the tapes. The story was never printed again, and Greaves declined all subsequent interviews. More recent research points to an even darker context. A 2014 FOIA request unearthed a correspondence between the US Air Materiel Command and the British Ministry of Supply. It referenced an inquiry into possible transfer of Eclipse personnel to Argentina, 1947-1948. That time frame overlaps with a series of unregistered flights departing Naples, believed to have been part of clandestine post-war extraction routes. An Argentine customs log from Mar del Plata lists a freighter named Santa Lucia, arriving May 9, 1948, carrying industrial equipment and aeronautical materials. The ship's manifest was signed by an individual using the alias H. Falcon. No such person existed in Argentine registry, but German records identify a Hauptmann Heinrich Falkenrath, last recorded at Innsbruck, April 1945. Today, the physical remnants of Operation Eclipse are almost non-existent. The tunnel network at Oberammer was sealed by Austrian authorities in 1962 following a rock slide, though eyewitnesses report military engineers were seen on site for several weeks beforehand. The surrounding land was declared unstable, and public access remains prohibited. Satellite imaging reveals faint subsidence patterns consistent with buried infrastructure. Austrian military archives deny the existence of any wartime facility in that region, though fragments of declassified correspondence from the post-war Reconstruction Ministry mention deep buried chambers requiring radiation screening. A single surviving artifact, an aircraft fragment, remains preserved at a private collection in Munich. The object is a curved metallic panel, 2 centimeters thick, bearing faint stenciling. EKLP 47A. Spectroscopic analysis in 2008 found traces of titanium and tungsten in a ratio inconsistent with any known wartime alloy. The panel's curvature suggests it belonged to a craft far smaller than a conventional fighter, perhaps an unmanned vehicle or glider. The collector, who requested anonymity, claimed the fragment was recovered in 1945 by his father, then a local laborer forced to assist US engineers in clearing debris from a collapsed tunnel. What became of the men of Gruppe Eclipse remains an enduring question. Of the 187 personnel listed in the last recorded roster, not a single confirmed death certificate exists. Allied records mark them all as missing, presumed captured. Yet no POW intake logs or Red Cross reports include their names. Some intelligence historians speculate they were quietly absorbed into Western research programs, their identities erased through post-war administrative merging. Others argue they never left Austria, that their disappearance coincided with a final catastrophic test of an experimental propulsion system. The most chilling evidence surfaced in 1989, when a collector in Innsbruck acquired a charred flight logbook from a demolished farmhouse near the old airfield. The pages were burned along the edges, but one entry was legible, dated April 21, 1945. It listed a short series of flight codes, followed by the notation, transition authorized, destination unknown, continuance protocol in effect. On the final page, in faint pencil, one word stood alone at the bottom margin: continuance. Forensic handwriting analysis later confirmed it matched the signature of Oberleutnant Falkenrath. If Operation Eclipse was merely an evacuation effort, its meticulous erasure from both German and Allied archives suggests more than secrecy, it implies collusion. If it was an experimental program, the question remains whether its technology ever resurfaced under a different name. In the absence of physical proof, the only surviving testimony is the silence left behind. And in the mountain wind that sweeps through the valleys of Innsbruck, Locals still speak of nights when a low, metallic hum rolls across the ridge, fading as suddenly as it comes, like the echo of an engine that never quite stopped running. Chapter 2. The Siberian Directive. Ghosts of Kolyma. Few places on Earth hold as much unspoken horror as the Kolyma region of eastern Siberia. Between the frozen rivers and the endless tundra, the Soviet Union built a prison empire, labor camps where men were worked to death under the banner of progress. Yet among these gulags, one site remained unlisted on any map, referenced only in restricted Soviet memoranda as Object 731K. Officially, it did not exist. Unofficially, it was one of the most secret biological facilities of the early Cold War, a place where the Soviet state continued what Imperial Japan and Nazi Germany had begun. The story began in the autumn of 1946, when train convoys left the ruins of Manchuria carrying crates of captured Japanese documents marked Unit 731 The Soviets had seized them from Harbin after Japan's surrender, along with several surviving officers. Stalin personally approved the establishment of a Northern Research Institute to integrate this data with German biomedical archives obtained from camps in Poland and Czechoslovakia. The order, signed by Lavrenti Beria, assigned command to NKVD Colonel Viktor A. Korolyev. His directive was simple: develop methods of biological deterrence capable of surviving extreme climates. The chosen site was deep in Kolyma, hidden among gold mines and frozen valleys, far from the eyes of any foreign observer. By early 1947, the first contingent of prisoners was transferred from the Sevostlag system to a newly fenced zone labelled Mining Camp 12B. The workers never mined gold. Instead, they excavated a concrete bunker complex reinforced with steel shipped from Vladivostok. According to later testimonies, the installation consisted of 3 underground levels: laboratories, storage vaults, and an isolation block. An unheated barrack stood a kilometre away, where test subjects were housed under guard. Declassified Soviet correspondence from 1956 refers to the facility's full name: Scientific Experimental Detachment 731K, Kolyma Special Region. Survivor accounts from nearby labor camps mention supply trains arriving under escort from the 14th Rifle Division. They brought metal containers bearing chemical hazard symbols and wooden crates sealed with Japanese kanji. No one knew what was inside. Prisoners tasked with unloading described a sharp, sour smell that lingered on their skin. Within weeks, several developed unexplained rashes and respiratory failure. Deaths were attributed to exposure and fatigue, though medical reports were withheld. In 1950, an internal MGB memorandum, later uncovered in fragmentary form, reported an outbreak of pathogenic instability at Object 731K. It recommended neutralization of all infected materials and personnel. The note was signed by Colonel Korolyev and countersigned by Deputy Minister for State Security S. Ogoltsov. Following the incident, the facility was sealed for 3 months, and 217 prisoners were declared transferred to other sites. Their names were struck from central records. When operations resumed, the site had expanded. Satellite photos from 1958, declassified only after the Soviet collapse, show new ventilation towers disguised as mine shafts and a rail spur, leading directly to a frozen airstrip. The few documents that survived the Soviet purge describe research in frost-resistant pathogens and aerosolized vectors. An internal memo from 1953 references integration of German material on agent Blutregen with Japanese serotype B cultures. The term Blutregen, blood rain, appears nowhere else in medical literature. Laboratory personnel were forbidden from leaving the site without authorization. Their correspondence was routed through Magadan and censored by military censors in Moscow. One letter, intercepted by Western intelligence in 1961, contained a cryptic complaint: "We are making men into snow." When Stalin died in 1953, Beria ordered a review of all high-risk weapons projects. Many were shuttered, but Object 731K survived. Korolyev argued its strategic necessity under the guise of climate adaptation research. He was promoted to general and reassigned to the Ministry of Medium Machine Building, which oversaw the Soviet nuclear program. In his absence, the Kolyma site was placed under the control of a new director, Major Yuri P. Savitsky, who shifted its focus to long-term storage and experimentation on low-temperature viral vectors. Between 1955 and 1958, Soviet freight logs record 22 sealed shipments leaving Magadan marked biological specimens, Priority A. None were ever received by any registered institute. The CIA first learned of the project through a defector in 1962. Dr. Leonid Petrov, a former microbiologist at the Institute of Infectious Diseases in Moscow, described a northern test site where human frost exposure was weaponized. His testimony was dismissed as unreliable until 1968, when U-2 reconnaissance revealed massive ground disturbances near Kolyma, a series of excavations extending 5 kilometers into the permafrost. Analysts initially believed it to be mining activity. However, the configuration resembled an underground network, with vents and access shafts arranged in a precise grid. The photographs were classified top secret Umbra. In 1974, a joint Soviet Ministry of Health report documented unexplained permafrost degradation near the old Kolyma mines. The cause was listed as industrial contamination. Yet chemical surveys taken by geologists in 1986 detected high levels of phenol, formaldehyde, and arsenic trioxide, agents commonly used for biological specimen preservation. Locals from the settlement of Debin recalled military trucks arriving at night to pour something thick and black into the earth. Those who approached were detained by soldiers. A few years later, cancer rates in the area tripled. No official investigation followed. When the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, a small group of journalists from Moscow obtained partial access to regional archives. Among the files they discovered was a 1949 directive titled Siberian Directive number 84731K. It authorized temporary cessation of test protocols due to containment failure, possible contamination of external population. Attached to the order was a list of destroyed materials, 8,732 tissue samples, 340 liters of biological medium, and 12 remaining human assets. The meaning of the last term was never explained. The file was signed simply, Korolev, Commander. Days after its discovery, the documents were seized by uniformed men claiming to represent the Federal Security Service. They have not been seen since. In 2004, a Russian geologist named Anton Baranov led an expedition to map abandoned mines in the Kolyma region. His team located a sealed concrete portal half buried under decades of snow. The door bore faint stenciled letters, 0731K. Inside, they found collapsed tunnels and rusted ventilation ducts. Geiger counters registered low but persistent radiation. Baranov reported finding glass vials embedded in ice, each filled with a viscous amber fluid. Before the samples could be retrieved, federal agents arrived by helicopter and ordered the team to evacuate. 2 weeks later, Baranov died in a car accident near Yakutsk. The samples were never analyzed. Satellite imagery from 2010 revealed new construction activity within 20 kilometers of the site, temporary housing, vehicle tracks, and an unmarked landing strip. The Russian government dismissed questions as infrastructure work. Yet internal data leaks in 2012 suggested a biological research institute under the Ministry of Defense had been reactivated in the Far East under the codename Polar Shield. No official link to Object 731K was acknowledged. Still, a leaked memo from the same year included a chilling line. Legacy materials from Kolyma are being re-evaluated for cryogenic resilience. To this day, the permafrost hides whatever remains of the Siberian Directive. The few who have studied its trail describe it as an unfinished story, a line of research born from the ashes of 2 fallen empires, carried forward under a new banner. The truth lies frozen under layers of secrecy and ice, preserved as perfectly as the bodies it claimed. When the wind cuts across the barren ridges of Kolyma, it whistles through the rusted vents of forgotten structures, and locals say it carries a faint chemical scent. They call it the sickness wind. No one goes near when it blows. The government insists there is nothing there. But every winter, as the ground shifts and the permafrost cracks, something metallic sometimes rises to the surface. A fragment of glass, a corroded vial, a tag stamped with the number 731K, and the snow turns a faint shade of rust before the next storm buries it again. Chapter 3. The Odessa Broadcast, Berlin's Last Transmission. At precisely 23:41 on the night of May 3rd, 1945, a faint radio signal was intercepted by a British monitoring post in Bletchley. It was transmitted on an obsolete low-band frequency used by the Reich's emergency network, emanating from somewhere within Berlin. The message lasted only 43 seconds, consisting of bursts of Morse, followed by a man's voice repeating a phrase twice in flawless English. Phase Odessa now active. Phase Odessa now active, then silence. Within minutes, the source was gone, drowned by Soviet artillery fire as the city fell. The operator on duty logged it as unknown origin, probable cipher test. For nearly a decade, the entry remained buried among thousands of intercepts from the final days of the war. It was only in 1952, during a joint Anglo-American intelligence review, that the file resurfaced. MI6 analyst Christopher Naylor noticed an anomaly. The voice in the recording had a faint Berlin accent, yet the pronunciation of English consonants was curiously precise, almost rehearsed. A spectral analysis by the BBC's Wartime Technical Division confirmed it had been broadcast from deep underground, likely through a hardline cable linked to a field transmitter. The coordinates triangulated to an area beneath Wilhelmstrasse, roughly corresponding to the old U-Bahn tunnel between the Friedrichstrasse and Potsdamer Platz stations. That tunnel had been sealed during the battle. When Soviet engineers reopened it weeks later, they discovered the charred remains of a communications center, cables cut, transmitters smashed, and several bodies in Wehrmacht uniforms. None were identifiable. For years, Phase Odessa was dismissed as a code word for a last-ditch evacuation or an internal directive lost to chaos. Yet, in 1956, a declassified US Army counterintelligence report revealed something deeply unsettling. Fragments of decrypted German naval traffic from 1945 referenced Operation Odessa, a maritime exfiltration plan designed to extract SS officers and high-value scientists through unregistered U-boat routes to South America. Until then, the Odessa network was considered post-war myth, popularized by sensational journalism. But this intercept, made before the Reich's collapse, suggested its activation had been real. In February 1961, Argentinian authorities intercepted a West German merchant ship docked in Buenos Aires. Among its crew was an elderly radio operator carrying a small reel of magnetic tape, labeled Archive 45. The content was later analyzed by Israeli intelligence and reportedly contained fragments of a coded broadcast identical to the Bletchley intercept. 2 months later, Adolf Eichmann was captured in the suburbs of the same city. Officially, no connection was ever acknowledged. Unofficially, Mossad files released decades later included a redacted page titled Subject, Odessa Transmission, Probable Berlin Origin. The accompanying note read simply, Message not meant for Germany. That same year, British Naval Intelligence discovered unregistered U-boat manifests showing departures from Kiel in late April 1945. Among them were 2 submarines listed as U-977 and U-963A. The latter's number does not appear in any official Kriegsmarine registry. Witnesses from the docks recalled both vessels were loaded with sealed crates marked Technische Unterlagen, technical documents, and relics. The submarines departed within hours of each other, bound south by west. U-977 surrendered months later in Argentina. The second was never found. The surviving captain of U-977U, Heinz Schäfer, denied all knowledge of any such cargo, but post-war interrogations by US naval intelligence record him referring cryptically to those who left before us. The phrase Phase Odessa appeared again in 1974, buried within a British Foreign Office memo concerning the disappearance of a BBC military recording tape catalogued as Baz 0345. The memo stated the item had been withdrawn under ministerial authority. The tape was the original May 3rd intercept. When archivists attempted to retrieve the entry 2 years later, they found the file expunged from the official index. A replacement note in red pencil simply read, Authorization rescinded by higher office. No one has ever identified who issued that order. Further corroboration emerged from Argentine naval archives in 1989, when declassification of wartime immigration records revealed the presence of several technical advisors arriving under Vatican-issued travel documents. One of these names, Karl Adler, matched a German radio engineer once attached to the Wehrmacht's cipher division. His pre-war specialty had been in low-frequency encrypted transmissions. Adler died in Buenos Aires in 1972. After his death, his family found a sealed envelope marked Berlin 45. Inside was a schematic of a tunnel communication relay system and a single sheet of paper with the words Phase Odessa, broadcast complete, continuation confirmed. Forensic analysis later confirmed the handwriting matched Adler's wartime logs. During the early 1990s, after the fall of the Soviet Union, fragments of captured German archives stored in Moscow were released to Western researchers. Among them was a folder labeled Bunker Kommandantur Berlin, April 1945 WWII. One document within referenced an emergency radio chamber beneath Sector E, equipped for transmission to external cells via foreign channels. The date on the document, April 27, 1945, matched the period immediately preceding the Bletchley intercept. The note included the initials RB, likely belonging to Reichsminister Rudolf Brandt, Himmler's personal adjutant. Next to it was a typed phrase in English, broadcast to proceed as scheduled. The Soviet archivists had annotated the page in pencil, potential escape coordination, South America link. More recent FOIA releases reveal that by 1965, both the CIA and MI6 maintained dedicated Odessa tracking units under different code names, Operation Dawn and Project Harbor. Their mission: monitor post-war Nazi escape routes through Europe and Latin America. One debriefing report from 1967 described an unregistered shortwave station broadcasting in Morse from the outskirts of Buenos Aires. Its code pattern mirrored that of the original Berlin message, using the same encryption rhythm. When technicians triangulated the source, they found an abandoned warehouse filled with outdated equipment, among it a 1940s German field transmitter of the same model recovered from the U-Bahn in Berlin. Analysis revealed the serial numbers had been filed off. By the 1980s, the Odessa broadcast had passed into rumor, another ghost story among Cold War operatives. Yet, in 2005, a retired intelligence officer from the British GCHQ division gave a private interview for a classified oral history program. He claimed to have heard the original tape during a training exercise in 1960. The voice, he said, wasn't frantic like you'd expect. It was calm, rehearsed, as if the speaker knew exactly what was coming. The English was deliberate, almost ceremonial, and at the end, before the line cuts, you can hear someone faintly in the background say something in German. Sounds like alles weitergeführt. Everything continues. Today, the recording remains lost. No copy exists in British, American, or Russian archives. Still, fragments of the transmission have surfaced online, often traced to anonymous leaks or declassified intercepts, each slightly different, as if reconstructed from memory or partial data. Some include only the Morse bursts, others the faint repetition of the English phrase. Audio analysts who have compared these fragments agree on one detail. The background noise contains low-frequency rumbling inconsistent with urban infrastructure, suggesting the transmitter was indeed underground, perhaps powered by portable generators. If the Odessa broadcast was merely a desperate act from a collapsing regime, its precision defies explanation. Its language, its calm tone, and its timing, mere days before the unconditional surrender, suggest coordination. If it was a signal, to whom was it sent, and who was meant to receive it? The Soviet occupation authorities sealed Berlin's tunnels for decades. Yet excavation work in 1998 unearthed a rusted communication cable beneath Leipziger Straße, leading to a collapsed chamber lined with concrete and armored wire. Embedded in the debris was a broken microphone plate bearing the Reichsadler insignia and the stamped serial RDF 045B. Beside it, a faded stencil barely legible under soot. Odessa. Theories abound that the Odessa network was more than an escape line, that it was a continuation strategy ensuring the survival of a certain ideology long after the Reich had fallen. Perhaps the transmission was never meant to be found. Perhaps it was merely the echo of men refusing to surrender. But for those who have heard the faint surviving copy, the calm voice from beneath a burning city whispering "Phase Odessa, now active," the war's end feels less like a conclusion and more like an intermission. And the silence that followed was not peace, but preparation. Chapter 4. Project Anthracite. The Mines of Thuringia. In the spring of 1946, US forces sweeping through central Germany stumbled upon an anomaly that would never appear in any official occupation report. Near the small Thuringian village of Jonastal, already scarred by weeks of shelling, engineers from the 11th Armoured Division uncovered a network of tunnels that seemed far too extensive to have been built for local mining. A weathered sign at the entrance read simply, Schacht 12, but the deeper the soldiers went, the less it resembled any conventional excavation. Corridors were lined with heat-resistant plating, conduits snaked through the ceilings, and strange lattice structures appeared halfway into the rock, as if ready to house machinery. The site was marked for investigation, yet within a week, it was placed under US Army custody and reclassified as Project Anthracite. Officially, it was a munitions storage site. Unofficially, its purpose remains one of the darkest enigmas of the post-war occupation. Jonestal had long been whispered about, even before the discovery. In early 1945, locals spoke of convoys arriving at night, covered trucks escorted by SS guards wearing the insignia of the Führer-Begleit Brigade. Civilians were forbidden entry to the valley. Prisoners from nearby Buchenwald were marched in by the hundreds, but few ever returned. When questioned after the war, surviving guards claimed the valley had been earmarked for an underground Führer headquarters, a last redoubt for the collapsing Reich. Yet the engineering layout found by Allied reconnaissance suggested otherwise. The design included high-voltage cabling, air filtration systems, and storage bays lined with reflective panels, characteristics more consistent with an energy or weapons facility than a command bunker. A declassified OSS memorandum dated May 14, 1946, recorded the impressions of Colonel David H. Wilkins, one of the first Americans to enter the site. Initial inspection indicates evidence of heat damage not attributable to explosives. Metallic surfaces within Chamber C show melting consistent with direct plasma exposure. Recommend technical team from Manhattan District be dispatched for evaluation. That recommendation was carried out 2 weeks later. A group of American physicists, including a young engineer named Robert Layton, surveyed the tunnels under strict secrecy. Layton's field notes, partially preserved in the National Archives, mention readings of ionizing radiation significantly above baseline, although no nuclear materials were found. He described one sealed chamber, its blast door fused shut, behind which instrumentation registered heat and residual magnetism beyond known tolerance. Within a month, all documentation was classified under Top Secret, Special Weapons Division. Meanwhile, Soviet troops advancing from the east were conducting their own inspections of the Thuringian mines. Marshal Zhukov's staff requested access to Jonestal, citing jurisdiction under the post-war occupation zones. They were denied. By June, American engineers had sealed the tunnels with concrete and stationed a perimeter guard. The official reason was danger of collapse. Soviet reconnaissance flights were barred from the airspace. When the Red Army finally re-entered the region in late 1949, they found the valley empty. Every tunnel entrance had been filled, the concrete hardened like stone. Yet Geiger readings taken by the Soviet 12th Directorate registered faint anomalies. A subsequent KGB report, declassified in fragments after 1991, referred to Jonestal as site of probable atomic experimentation by Anglo-American forces utilizing captured German research. The phrase Wotan Nai appears throughout the document, identified as a possible energy device. According to scattered German wartime records, Wotan was the codename for an experimental reactor program initiated under the Reich Research Council in 1944. Its technical lead, Dr. Ernst Heisenfeld, a theoretical physicist educated under Werner Heisenberg, vanished in April 1945. Post-war Allied files list him as unlocated, presumed deceased. However, an Austrian Red Cross registration from 1948 lists a Heinz Feld, employed at a power station in Linz. Handwriting analysis later suggested the same signature. Whether Heisenfeld survived under a false identity or was quietly extracted remains unknown. Yet a US Army counterintelligence report from 1950 notes the sudden appearance of an unnamed German consultant attached to a classified research effort at Oak Ridge National Laboratory. His role was listed as lattice stability analysis. Throughout the 1950s, rumors of Project Anthracite persisted among Thuringian locals. Shepherds reported unmarked trucks driving into the sealed valley at night. In 1958, an East German state security informant described foreign-speaking men surveying the area with instruments. When the Stasi attempted to investigate, the Ministry for State Security received a directive from Moscow ordering the inquiry closed. The internal note stated, "Subject Jonestal is under higher jurisdiction. No further action." Yet internal GDR geology maps from the era mark the site as geologisch gesperrt, geologically restricted despite being far from any known instability zones. In 1962, following a rock slide that exposed one of the collapsed tunnels, an East German geologist named Hans Mertens entered the cavity before police arrived. His field diary, later smuggled to the West, describes what he saw inside: scorched walls, fused metal supports, and the remnants of cylindrical tanks, each stamped with a faded eagle and the code WX9. He claimed to have found shards of glass tubing that glowed faintly under ultraviolet light. Within days of his discovery, Mertens was arrested by the Stasi for unauthorized trespass on a restricted zone. He died 2 months later in custody. His notes vanished, resurfacing only in 1993 after German reunification. That same year, a joint academic team from Jena University and the Technical University of Munich conducted a limited survey of the valley under environmental pretext. Seismic imaging revealed vast hollow structures still intact beneath the bedrock. Radiation measurements showed trace contamination consistent with uranium decay, but not from ore deposits. The readings suggested artificial concentration. The team's report, submitted to the new German Federal Archives, was classified vertraulich and sealed indefinitely. One of the researchers later disclosed that they had recovered fragments of synthetic graphite embedded in the soil, material often used in early reactor moderation. It was labeled Material aus Jonastahl, unbekannte Herkunft. Material from Jonastahl, unknown origin. In 1989, as East Germany collapsed, Stasi archivists attempted to destroy sensitive files. Among those rescued from a shredded pile was a single page referencing Project Anthracite. It contained only a short description: objective, containment and reconstruction of captured Wotan reactor. Status: incomplete, sealed 1946 by US Army. The existence of such a reactor remains unverified, yet a US Atomic Energy Commission briefing from the same year references anomalous isotope distribution in Thuringia region, consistent with short-term fission residue. The coincidence is difficult to ignore. Modern investigators who have visited Jonastahl describe an eerie quiet. Access is restricted by the Bundeswehr due to unexploded ordnance, though satellite imagery shows what appear to be reinforced concrete slabs still covering the main shafts. In 2007, an Austrian documentary team using ground-penetrating radar detected large metallic anomalies 30 meters below the surface, arranged in geometric alignment. Permission to excavate was denied by the German government. When pressed, a Defense Ministry spokesperson replied that the matter concerns former Allied installations. Whether Project Anthracite was an experimental reactor, a failed weapons platform, or an attempt to replicate foreign technology remains speculative. But the pattern of concealment, its immediate US appropriation, the post-war radiation anomalies, and the systematic erasure of German personnel suggests a technology far beyond the official timeline of 1945. The surviving codenames, Wotan-Neuss, Anthracite, Heisenfeld, read like fragments of a story deliberately scattered. Whatever occurred beneath the forests of Thuringia in those final days of the war, it left behind no witnesses and no trace except scorched rock and whispers of light where no sun reaches. Even now, hunters in the valley speak of nights when the ground trembles faintly and the air hums with static, as if the tunnels below still breathe. When asked what they think lies beneath, one old man in Jonastahl gave the same answer, repeated since the occupation. Something the Americans found, but never buried completely. You can't bury fire. Chapter 5. The Vatican File, Operation Hallow Cross. In early 1947, a routine archival transfer in the Vatican's Secretariat of State uncovered a sealed dossier marked Sacramentum, Hallow Cross. It contained correspondence written in Italian, Latin and German, all bearing dates between 1944 and 1948. The discovery was never acknowledged publicly, and the file was immediately reclassified by papal order. What little is known comes from a handful of photocopied pages smuggled from the Vatican archives in the 1970s by an anonymous Jesuit scholar. Those pages revealed the existence of a covert operation run through the Church's humanitarian relief network at the end of the Second World War, an effort not of mercy, but of concealment. The Vatican had long maintained its own intelligence arm, the Servizio Informazioni Vaticano, SIV, an informal structure that gathered wartime reports from Catholic missions across Europe. But as the Reich collapsed, the SIV became something far more active. The documents refer to a program, Operation Hallow, tasked with preserving spiritual and scientific heritage endangered by the collapse of Christian Europe. Behind the euphemism was a system of extraction routes designed to smuggle Axis scientists, SS officials, and collaborators out of Europe under clerical protection. The network overlapped with existing escape lines later known as the Rat Lines, but Hallow appears to have been a higher-order initiative, coordinated not by rogue priests, but sanctioned individuals within the Curia itself. The first traceable mention of Hallow appears in a letter dated November 1944 from Bishop Alois Hudal, rector of the Pontificio Istituto Teutonico, to Monsignor Giovanni Montini, then serving as Under-Secretary of State. Certain men, Hudal wrote, possess knowledge which must not fall into godless hands, neither Bolshevik nor Anglo. The letter requested diplomatic cover for technicians of strategic value seeking refuge through ecclesiastical channels. 2 months later, a directive was circulated among several Redemptorist monasteries in Austria and northern Italy, authorizing temporary housing for displaced scholars. The attached list included names later identified as high-ranking members of the Reich's weapons ministries, including Dr. Otto von Knell, V2 Propulsion, and Colonel Franz Rademacher, Foreign Office. Each name was assigned a code name prefixed Pax. After Germany's surrender, the Catholic Relief Organization, Pontificia Commissione di Assistenza, began issuing travel documents, temporary identification papers for refugees. Within the first 6 months, over 10,000 were distributed. Among them were a handful of forged Red Cross certificates, signed by a Father Gregor Schwenninger of Salzburg. One such document surfaced in Buenos Aires decades later, bearing the name Ricardo Clement, the alias used by Adolf Eichmann. The paper's Vatican serial number traced back to a missing block of certificates tied to the Hallow ledger. Whether the Church knew who Clement truly was remains uncertain, but the logistical overlap is undeniable. What sets Hallow apart from other post-war rat lines is the nature of its cargo. The smuggled files mention Aegis assets, a classification applied to both individuals and physical objects. In a memorandum dated March 1946, Cardinal Eugène Tisserand warned the Secretariat that certain materials are of a character both spiritual and technological, touching upon the order of creation itself. He urged their removal from Europe before the Soviet advance. Attached to the memo was an inventory of items, metal canisters marked with the Reichsadler insignia, research notes on biological transubstantiation, and an engine prototype requiring holy custody. Scholars who later reviewed the fragment believed the Cardinal was referring to advanced medical and chemical research. Seized from SS facilities, the use of theological language likely served as deliberate obfuscation. By late 1947, Hallow was fully operational. Priests with diplomatic immunity accompanied shipments from Genoa, Trieste, and Naples under Red Cross cover. The most frequent destination was Argentina, where a sympathetic government under Juan Perón offered sanctuary. Other routes led to Spain, Portugal, and the Middle East. The correspondence includes multiple references to Pater Egidius, believed to be a Jesuit liaison coordinating between the Vatican and Allied intelligence intermediaries. The Americans, eager to secure German scientists before the Soviets, tolerated the Church's involvement. A US Army CIC cable from 1948 references Vatican extraction of technical personnel approved within limits. Yet even within the Curia, unease grew. A 1949 letter from the Apostolic Nuncio in Switzerland warned, "The mercy extended to men of intellect has become a cloak for darkness. Their papers speak not of science, but of sorcery." He enclosed a typed confession from a Benedictine abbot who claimed to have hidden sealed cylinders of infernal purpose in the cellars of his monastery at Admont. No record of a subsequent investigation exists. By 1950, most Hallow correspondence ceased. A final telegram from Archbishop Montini, later Pope Paul VI, instructed, "All assistance now withdrawn. Archives sealed. Custody of relics remains within divine jurisdiction." In the following decades, scattered references continued to surface. A 1962 Argentine customs manifest listed the arrival of church donations, machinery for seminary use, shipped from Genoa aboard the San Marco. Inside the cargo manifest were 7 crates marked Aegis. A local dock worker later claimed he saw cylindrical containers the size of coffins being loaded into a military truck escorted by police. Nothing further was recorded. Declassified CIA field reports from the same year contain handwritten notes. Possible Hallow cross continuation. Request Vatican cooperation denied. The most revealing evidence appeared briefly in 1978, when the aforementioned Jesuit scholar leaked several copied pages from the Vatican's Archivio Segreto. Among them was a cover sheet stamped Sacramentum Strictissimum. The typed summary read, "Operations under Hallow Cross concluded 1949. All physical Aegis materials either destroyed or transferred to Custodia Sancta. Location undisclosed. Handwritten beneath in Latin, Ne tangatis cineres Dei. Touch not the ashes of God. Within days, Vatican security detained the suspected leaker. The documents vanished again." After the fall of the Soviet Union, historians gained access to portions of Soviet intelligence files on post-war church operations. A 1951 GRU analysis described systematic relocation of German specialists through ecclesiastical fronts, likely supported by Western agencies. It noted particular concern about biological and energy-based research of German origin now held under papal seal. The report concluded that the Vatican retains more than theological secrets. These claims were dismissed as Cold War propaganda, yet their consistency with Western fragments is striking. In 2009, an Italian investigative journalist, Marco Bellini, claimed to have found a reference to Hallow Cross while cataloguing sealed diplomatic communications in the Archivio di Stato. Among the documents was a telegram from the Vatican Embassy in Buenos Aires dated September 1950. Package arrived safely, lodged within convent as per instruction. Await further word from Rome regarding the relic's dispersal. Days after Bellini went public, his office was burgled and the documents stolen. He later withdrew from public life, citing ecclesiastical pressure. The exact contents of the Aegis assets remain unknown. Some researchers believe they were advanced technologies, prototype jet engines or biochemical materials, smuggled to prevent their capture by the Soviets. Others, more conspiratorial, suggest the assets were documents detailing human experimentation cloaked in metaphysical rhetoric. A handful of fringe historians claim the relics were indeed holy, in a darker sense, scientific attempts to merge faith with physiology, conducted under the pretext of divine authority. Whatever the truth, the Vatican has never commented. The corridors of the Apostolic Palace still guard their silences. The Archivum Secretum Vaticanum, now renamed simply Archivio Apostolico, contains millions of pages still inaccessible to researchers. Requests for documents pertaining to Operation Hallow Cross or Aegis assets are met with formal denials. Only one faint clue lingers. In a 1998 Vatican inventory of transferred classified material, a single file marked HC47 Repatriation of Sacred Technology appears, its destination listed as Custodia Sancta, Mount Tabor. The entry was later redacted in subsequent editions. If Hallow Cross was ever real, it existed at the intersection of faith, power, and fear, a last attempt by a war-torn church to control the knowledge the Nazis left behind. Its legacy is scattered across continents, in false passports bearing clerical seals, in monastery basements that once housed unholy cargo, and in the sealed chambers of an archive that has outlived empires. To this day, when Vatican archivists refer to the dark files, they lower their voices. For somewhere, beneath marble and prayer, lies the file marked Sacramentum, Hallow Cross, and perhaps within it, the final proof that even salvation can be engineered. When the lights fade and the reels stop spinning, what lingers is not the truth, but the weight of what was never meant to be found. Somewhere, a vault door remains locked, not out of fear of what's inside, but fear of what remembering it might awaken. In the cold silence of forgotten tunnels and sanctified rooms, the past hums like a current, restless and alive. They called it progress, redemption, necessity, but history remembers the taste of ash. Every sealed file, every burned report, every missing name was meant to keep a single promise, that some knowledge must remain buried. Yet the ground never holds its breath forever. The whispers of the dead, the hum of machines that no longer exist, and the prayers of those who built them, they all converge into one question the living must face. What if the past never stopped watching?